Subaru has dabbled with hybrids in the past, but for 2025 and 2026, they're shifting their hybrid strategy into high gear with not one, but two different hybrid models. And the hybrid models are not going to be restricted to one singular trim. In the Forester, this is going to be their biggest and most expensive hybrid. This is going to be available in 4 different trim levels, all the way from the premium trim on up to the top-end touring trim. So if you want better fuel economy, better performance, a quieter interior, and the longest driving range available in a Forester, you want to check out the new hybrid for 2025. Yes, 2025, because the Crosstrek hybrid, which they announced last month, is actually going to be a 2026. It's coming a little bit later in calendar year 2025. This is going to be the first hybrid model sold. Now, it's not a plug-in hybrid, but it uses basically the same hybrid system that we found in the previous generation Crosstrek plug-in hybrid, updated for use in a regular hybrid. So no plug, but you will get 35 miles per gallon. That's a pretty significant improvement, allowing almost 600 miles of driving range. Let's take a look at the styling first, because Subaru decided that it should look exactly like the rest of the Forester lineup. And indeed, there are almost no changes on the outside. This is the top-end touring model, and you can tell because we do get a black roof option. This is going to be the only Forester with the two-tone paint job that you see here, and that's one way to differentiate them. If you're taking a look at the other trims, because again, there are going to be 4 different trim levels of hybrid, the only way you'll be able to tell the difference is by this little hybrid badge over here on the side. As we move around here, you'll notice it's exactly the same Forester that shoppers have really been attracted to. So lots of ground clearance. That's one big reason to get the Forester hybrid over, well, any of the hybrid competition out there, is that we get nearly 9 inches of ground clearance and generous approach, breakover, and departure angles. Now, if Travis comes along to the back, you'll notice the back end design also pretty similar to the regular Forester, except that we get that hybrid badge right there on the trunk. Let's take a deep dive into the new Subaru hybrid system now, because this is an interesting blend of worlds, a hybrid of hybrids, you might say. Up front and center, we have a Subaru 4-cylinder boxer engine running on the Atkinson cycle. It's basically a modified version of the Subaru 2.5-liter 4-cylinder boxer we find in a wide variety of different Subaru models. We have an electric air conditioning compressor up front, as you'd expect in a full hybrid. This is a full hybrid, but not a plug-in hybrid. Now, the rest of the system behind the engine, that is based largely on the plug-in hybrid system that we found in the previous generation Subaru Crosstrek, with some important updates. And that means it still contains a lot of Toyota technology. Inside that transmission case, we have 2 motor generator units, and they function the exact same way that every other planetary power split Toyota hybrid system works. It can drive in electric-only mode using the larger motor, which is about 118 horsepower or so, to drive the front and the back wheels forward, because this uses a regular mechanical Subaru all-wheel drive system. And that's the big difference between this hybrid system and what we find in a RAV4 hybrid. Now, because of the mechanical all-wheel drive system and likely perhaps the design of the engine, fuel economy is going to be below what we find in the RAV4 hybrid, 35 miles per gallon combined, versus 40 miles per gallon combined in the RAV4. But there are some additional differences to keep in mind. The RAV4 hybrid uses an e-all-wheel drive setup where there is a separate motor in the back of the RAV4. Again, this does not use that kind of system. That tends to be a bit more efficient than a mechanical all-wheel drive system, but it doesn't feel like a regular all-wheel drive system, especially if you're on snow or ice, or you're trying to do some mild off-roading in a RAV4 hybrid. You will really notice the difference. With this, it's going to have the exact same traction capability and actually a little bit more low-end torque than you find in a regular Forester, which is why I'm actually surprised that we don't find this hybrid system in the Forester Wilderness. Maybe that's coming at some point in the future. The all-wheel drive system and the rear differential, they're exactly the same as the regular Forester, and that is the big advantage to this hybrid system. Now, logically, there are a few disadvantages to a system like this. This is going to be a tiny bit heavier than a regular Forester, which is why up front we get slightly larger front brakes than we find in a regular Forester model. Let's check out the tires in this one. This has 235/50 R19s. Wheel there is very similar to what we find in the rest of the Forester lineup. And if we come back here to the cargo area, you will notice the other compromise. And this is perhaps why we don't find this hybrid system in the Forester Wilderness yet. If I take out the rubber floor mat, you'll notice over here on this side, we have a slightly different rear area. No storage cubby because there's a little bit of a duct there for the air-cooled lithium-ion battery pack that lives right here under the cargo load floor. Now, what is a little bit disappointing about this is that it occupies not only the area where the spare tire lives, but it actually, if I take out this little foam divider here that they have installed, you'll see that there's actually a decent amount of space underneath that battery pack. So I do think that could have been packaged just a tiny bit better. Maybe if it occupied the spare tire well, if it was a round battery pack, then they could have given us a little bit of extra storage space in the back. On the other hand, aside from the loss of the spare tire, the interior and exterior dimensions are exactly the same as the regular Forester. So the cargo area, it's just as big, just as square, and unlike many of the hybrids that we find in this segment, you don't lose any rear seat legroom or rear seat headroom because the battery is not under the rear seats. So if we're talking about, for instance, a RAV4 or a CR-V hybrid, things do change geometrically back here just a little bit because the battery pack is under the seats and that causes the seats to be a little bit higher up. Not so in the Forester. The interior is largely the same as the non-hybrid Forester models. The seats are basically the same design, the door panels and dashboard look very similar as well. In the touring trim, we get the exact same upholstery, but if we're looking at the other trims, you get a vegan leather, basically imitation leather interior instead, because Subaru said that a lot of their customers are interested in not having any animal products. We have the panoramic moonroof above, but it's not quite as panoramic as some moonroofs in this particular segment. Now, I say at first glance because if I close the driver's door and we rotate the camera around, you'll notice that we have the large touchscreen infotainment system here in the center of the dashboard, but over here on this side, we find a full LCD instrument cluster. We recently saw this at the recent drive of the WRX. If I press the button on the steering wheel, you notice we have a bunch of different modes, including a basic full screen navigation mode, and that can use either the mapping from the car or mapping from CarPlay. So you do get two-screen CarPlay in here. We still have a bunch of different toggles on the steering wheel, ways to control that system. Those are the buttons over there. And you can roll through things like where the hybrid power is flowing, that sort of thing, infotainment screens, all that. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column that looks basically the same as the rest of the lineup. Same cruise control buttons over there, same infotainment buttons over there on that side. The big difference is just the functionality of that full screen LCD system. The only other change is over here to the left of the steering wheel where we find an EV mode button. And that means that we still have the comfortable front seats and a relatively upright seating position that I've always really loved in the Forester. Because this is such a tall and boxy entry in this segment, rather than some of the sleeker options that you see out there, especially something like a Mazda CX-50, we have the ability to sit upright in the front and give rear passengers, especially child seats in the back, significantly more room. If you want to recline, obviously you could, but sitting in that position, for me at 6 feet tall, as you can see, I probably have about 9 or 10 inches of legroom left. There is significantly more legroom in here and more room, especially for rear-facing child seats, than in a RAV4 Hybrid. In a RAV4 Hybrid, you could not put a rear-facing child seat safely behind me driving the vehicle. In here, you definitely could. And if you come in closer, we get a lot of extra room here. Even on this side where the seat's further back, you can see I have tons of legroom. We do have a hump in the middle, but it's not terribly aggressive. Rear air vents right there in the middle. And headroom, that's pretty generous in the back, even if I scoot over to the middle seat, where I have, maybe about 3/4 of an inch or so. My hair is not brushing the ceiling, even though the center seat position is a little bit higher off the ground. Then, as I said before, exactly the same cargo area in the back that we find in the regular Forester. Now, unfortunately, at this point in time, Subaru has not said how much this hybrid system is going to cost. However, this uses the same basic components that we find in Toyota's hybrid systems. Interestingly, MG1 and MG2 in this transmission are not the same motors that we find in the RAV4, but they are basically the same motors that we find in some of the bigger Toyota hybrids, most likely shared with something like the Highlander and Grand Highlander, repackaged by Subaru in a Subaru factory into the Subaru transmission. So I suspect that price tag wise, we're going to see a very similar pricing ladder to what we find in the Toyota lineup. The 1.1 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery pack in the rear probably uses the same cells that we find in other Toyota hybrids. Remember, Toyota is the largest investor in Subaru. They own about 20% of the company, and that's why we see this tie-up. But I'm really glad that Subaru did not just wholesale buy a Toyota hybrid system like we saw Mazda do with the CX-50. CX-50 uses the exact same hybrid system as the RAV4. This is a very different implementation of a similar concept because we get that mechanical all-wheel drive system. So snow performance, ice performance, mud performance. If you want to go off-roading in your Forester hybrid, you could do that. You just have to probably strap a spare tire on the roof rack or in the cargo area because I probably wouldn't want to off-road without one, but the mechanical all-wheel drive system makes a big, big difference. If I were to go out on a limb, I would expect somewhere between a $1,500 and $2,000 premium between the non-hybrid Forester and the hybrid Forester. I think that's a fantastic deal. We get significantly better city fuel economy, a slight bump in highway fuel economy. We go up to 35 miles per gallon from 29 miles per gallon combined. It's a pretty decent difference there. If you do a lot of stop and go, a lot of slow and go driving, it's going to be a big, big difference in fuel economy. But more importantly, you also get more power. Subaru is saying 15% better passing performance in this model than the regular model out on the highway, longer driving between fill-ups, and it's going to be quieter out on the road because in addition to all of that, they decided to add extra sound deadening, and that's the thing that I hadn't expected. They said they've added a significant amount of sound deadening foam on the complete underbody of the Forester hybrid. They said they did that for two reasons. The first one is they think this is a more premium shopper that probably wants a quieter vehicle. The second reason is because the engine is going to spend a lot of time off, people are going to be more aware of some of the different sounds that come in from the ground. The benefit to you is, whether the engine's on or off, it's going to be quieter than a regular Forester out on the road. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. And are you interested in a Forester hybrid, or would you rather have not the same all-wheel drive performance, but 5 miles per gallon better fuel economy in something like a RAV4? Keep in mind, again, that RAV4 is going to have a smaller passenger area in the back. If my cash were on the line, even if the Forester was a bit more expensive than the RAV4, I have to admit, I think this is the direction I would go in. More ground clearance, more all-wheel drive capability. I'm willing to give up a little bit of fuel economy for that. The only thing I wish it had was at least a teeny tiny little donut spare in the back. And I think Subaru really could have done that if they tried. I would love to see a mid-cycle refresh maybe with a different battery pack that could still have at least a tiny little donut in the back. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned for some extra content because there is, of course, a Forester Wilderness coming later this year as well. And if you haven't already checked out our video on the Crosstrek hybrid, be sure and do that because it's basically the same hybrid system in the smaller Crosstrek, so it should be a little bit more fun and a little bit more efficient as well. See all of you later.